My name is Nadia Calloway, and I'm 31 years old. My father said it at the Thanksgiving table, in front of 12 people, without lowering his voice. He said I had never contributed anything to this family. He said it the way people say things they have believed for a long time, with the calm of someone who expects no argument. I didn't argue. I set down my fork, folded my napkin, and looked at the centerpiece my grandmother had arranged that morning. 6 months later, an attorney named Gerald Osei called all of us into his conference room on a Tuesday. He had a folder. He had a list. And he had my name at the top of it. I am a fund manager. I have been one since I was 26. I run a mid-sized portfolio at Crane and Hallowell Asset Partners in Cincinnati, Ohio, a firm that manages just over $340 million in client assets across institutional and high net worth accounts. I arrive at my desk most mornings by 7:15 a.m. I wear good shoes. I keep my desk clear. I do not talk about my work at family gatherings. I made that decision deliberately, years ago, and I have never once regretted it. The Thanksgiving in question was the 23rd of November, 2023. It was held at my grandmother's house on Aldermere Lane, a two-story craftsman on a quiet residential block in the northwest part of the city, the house she had lived in for 44 years. There were two turkeys. There were 16 people seated at three tables pushed end to end through the dining room and into the front hallway. My grandmother, Elaine Ruth Calloway, had set out cloth napkins she ironed herself that morning. She was 81 years old. She moved slowly, but she always ironed the napkins. She had done it since before I was born, and she did it that Thursday too. Folding each one into a neat rectangle and setting it left of the fork, with the quiet deliberateness of someone who believes that care in small things reflects care in large ones. I believe the same thing. That was one of the things we had in common. My father, Douglas Calloway, sat at the head of the main table. He is 63. He retired early from a mid-level director position at a regional logistics company and has spent the years since that retirement cultivating a confident expertise in evaluating other people's failures. It is an expertise he applies broadly, but he applies it to me with a specific and practiced fluency that I have come to recognize the way you recognize a piece of furniture, not because you think about it, but because it is always there. He said what he said just after the second round of dishes was passed. My cousin Trevor had made a comment, something half joking, about investment funds, about whether the market was going to crash before Christmas. It was not directed at anyone in particular. But my father turned in his chair and looked across the table at me with the expression he wore when he saw an opening, and he said, "Don't ask her. She's never contributed anything to this family, or anywhere else as far as I can tell." 12 people heard it. A few looked at their plates. My Aunt Patricia, my grandmother's eldest daughter, a woman who has spent her entire adult life finding tactful ways to be in the same room as my father, made a small sound and reached for her water glass. My brother Garrett, who was seated next to my father, laughed. Not cruelly, I thought. Reflexively, the way you laugh when the alternative is speaking. Two of my cousins exchanged a look across the table. My Uncle Raymond concentrated very carefully on the dish in front of him. My grandmother, at the far end of the table, looked up. She looked at my father. She looked at me. Her expression was the specific kind of stillness that is not emptiness, but its opposite. A fullness held very quietly inside a face that has learned not to let everything show. She picked up her fork and ate. I set my fork down. I folded my napkin. I looked at the centerpiece she had made: dried wheat stalks and a few orange marigolds, arranged in a low clay vessel she had owned for 30 years. Her hands had made that. I looked at it until my face was completely still, and then I kept looking at it for another moment after that. I said nothing. The thing about being dismissed in front of people you have known your entire life is that it has a specific texture. It is not the words. The words are almost beside the point after a certain number of years. It is the sound of every other person in the room deciding, in real time, what they are going to do with what they just heard. Most of them do nothing. They look at their plates, or they reach for their water, or they laugh. the reflexive laugh that means I am not going to be the one who speaks. They have been making that decision for years. I had learned not to require anything different from them. It would have been like requiring the furniture to rearrange itself. I stayed for the rest of the dinner. I helped carry plates to the kitchen. I said goodbye to everyone, and I said goodbye to my grandmother last. I grew up understanding, with the particular clarity that children develop before they have language for it, that I was not my father's primary concern. That distinction belonged to my brother Garrett. Garrett is 3 years older than me. He is not a bad person. I want to be precise about that because I do not think this story is about him being bad. He played high school football. He attended a state university on a partial athletic scholarship and studied business administration in a general way. He came back to Cincinnati after 2 years and joined my father's logistics company in a junior role that grew slowly and with considerable assistance from my father into a senior one. He is steady and good-natured and completely unbothered by the systems that organize his life because those systems have always organized themselves in his favor. That is the specific innocence of the golden child. They do not tend to notice the architecture of their position because they have never had to. My father's investment in Garrett was visible and constant. It expressed itself in money and attention, and in the particular way he spoke about him to other adults, the pride in his voice, the forward lean, the way a story about Garrett always ended with something Garrett had accomplished. My father came to his games. He co-signed his first car loan. He made calls on his behalf when Garrett needed them made. These are things fathers do for sons they have decided are worth it. For me, he did something different. He waited. I was 9 years old the first time I understood the difference clearly. I won a regional mathematics competition, third place, county-wide, 68 students. I brought the certificate home on a Friday afternoon. My father was watching a football game in the living room. He said, "That's good, Nadia," without turning his head, and went back to the game. 2 weeks later, Garrett's youth football team won a preseason scrimmage that did not count toward any official record. My father drove 40 minutes to attend. He came home talking about it with the specific energy he reserved for things that mattered to him. He talked about it for 3 days. I noted the difference. I filed it. I went to my room and kept doing mathematics. I went to Indiana University in the fall of 2011 on a full academic scholarship in economics and finance. I graduated in May 2015 with a 3.94 grade point average. My father attended the ceremony. He took photographs. He also took photographs of Garrett, who had come to watch, and he took them with the same enthusiasm and for approximately the same duration. I noticed this. I did not comment on it. By then, I had developed a working understanding that commenting on it would accomplish nothing except making me the person who had complained. I completed a 2-year analyst program at a regional investment firm in Columbus. I was promoted twice. In June 2019, Crane and Hallowell Asset Partners in Cincinnati recruited me for a fund management role. I moved back to the city I had grown up in, though I lived on the opposite side of it, in a one-bedroom apartment near the river with east-facing windows that got the morning light. I told my family I had a new position. I did not tell them the specifics of my compensation. I did not tell them the size of the portfolio I was managing, or the clients I was responsible for. I had learned what happened when you gave my father information he had not already decided how to categorize. He found ways to make it smaller than it was. It was easier not to give him the material. In the spring of 2021, I purchased a condominium, $387,000. I put $94,000 down in cash, and I paid off the remaining mortgage by January 2023. I told my grandmother about it. She asked me to describe every room. I described the kitchen first, and then the east-facing windows in the main room, and she said that east-facing light was for people who get up and do things. I have thought about that sentence many times since. I visited her every other Sunday. Sometimes I brought food, the specific things she liked, a particular kind of almond cookie from the bakery on Madison Road, or the hard cheeses she preferred, or a container of the lentil soup she had taught me to make. Sometimes I just came and sat with her. She watched nature programs in the afternoons, birds, primarily, and the migration documentaries about large animals crossing African grasslands. We talked through them. She asked questions that surprised me, sharp ones, specific ones. Questions about compound interest and trust structures and estate law that told me she had been reading things, thinking things, educating herself in areas that no one expected her to care about. She was 81. She was paying very close attention. I was the one who drove her to the cardiologist on the 8th of March 2022. Her primary cardiologist was Dr. Yemi Adeyemi at Cincinnati Cardiovascular Associates on Vine Street. Dr. Adeyemi is 44 years old, direct and thorough, and she speaks to patients as though they are fully capable adults, which my grandmother appreciated. I sat in the waiting room with a small notepad and wrote down everything Dr. Adeyemi explained about the medication adjustment, the dosage change, the monitoring schedule, the specific symptoms to watch for. Afterward, I drove my grandmother to the pharmacy, waited while the prescription was filled, drove her home, and made sure she ate before I left. It was a Thursday. I was back at my desk by 4:30 p.m. I did this kind of thing regularly, not because I had decided to, not because anyone had asked me to, but because it needed doing, and I was the one who noticed it needed doing. That is the simplest explanation I can offer. My grandmother never made a production of these visits. Neither did I. They were just Sundays. They were just what we did. By November 2023, the fund I managed at Crane and Hallowell had grown from $218 million to $340 million in assets under management. My salary that year was $214,000, with a performance-based bonus of $38,500. My personal investment accounts held $892,000 across 3 vehicles. I had been named to a regional business journal's list of emerging financial leaders in the fall of 2022, a fact I did not mention to my family. I had also been asked, in September 2023, to join the advisory board of a nonprofit financial literacy organization on the east side of the city, a role I had accepted and was finding genuinely meaningful. None of this was known to my father. He knew I worked in finance. He had once described the profession, at a family dinner approximately 2 years earlier, as shuffling other people's money around. I had smiled and reached for the bread. The Thanksgiving comment, he said what he said. I said nothing. I drove home at 9:47 p.m. on I-75 South, with the radio off and the city lights on the river. I thought about my grandmother's centerpiece, the wheat stalks, the marigolds, the clay vessel she had owned for 30 years. I thought about the specific expression on her face when she looked at me across the table after my father spoke. The stillness of it, the fullness of it. Something completed itself on that drive. Not a decision, precisely, more like the final closing of a door I had been standing in front of for a long time. I had spent 27 years waiting, in various ways and with diminishing hope, for my father to see me with something close to accuracy. On that drive south, with the radio off and the lights on the water, I understood that I was finished waiting. Not with bitterness, not with anger. With the particular clarity of a person who has finally run the full accounting and arrived at an honest number. I got home at 9:47 p.m. I stood at my kitchen window with a cup of chamomile tea. The river was dark below. The east-facing windows showed nothing in the dark, except the reflection of my kitchen light. I stood there for a while. I let the weight of it settle the years, the accumulated smallness of being told in 100 different registers that what you are is not quite enough. I let it be real. I did not call anyone. I did not write anything down. Then I rinsed my cup. I went to bed. I was asleep by 10:45 p.m. There is a difference between giving up and letting go. Giving up is grief for a door you still want to open. Letting go is the recognition, arrived it slowly and then all at once, that the door was never yours to begin with. I let go that night. It was not dramatic. It felt like setting down something I had been carrying for so long that I had stopped noticing its weight. The next morning, I was at Crane and Hallowell by 7:15 a.m. I had 3 client reviews and a portfolio rebalancing analysis. I did all of them. I did them carefully and well. And I did not think about my father for the rest of that day, which was, in its own quiet way, the beginning of something different. My grandmother called me on Thursday, the 11th of January 2024. It was 3:30 inches the afternoon. I was between meetings in the fourth floor conference room we used for private calls. Her voice was steady, but there was an intentionality to it, a particular quality of weight, like someone choosing each word not because they were unsure of it but because they wanted to be sure I understood it correctly. She said she wanted to talk, not on the phone, in person. Could I come on Sunday? I came on Sunday, the 14th of January, 2024. She made real coffee, the dark roast she kept for occasions she considered serious, not the instant she used for ordinary mornings. We sat at the kitchen table, the one with the wobbly left leg she had never gotten around to having fixed. Morning light came through the window above the sink. The almond cookies I had brought sat between us on a small plate. She told me she had updated her estate documents. She said she had been thinking about it for a long time, across many years, and that she had arrived at her decisions carefully and without ambiguity. She had worked with Gerald Osei at Osei and Blackwood Estate Planning on Forsyth Avenue since 1997. She said Gerald was meticulous and that she trusted him completely. She said she wanted me to understand that her decisions reflected what she had actually observed over 31 years about who had shown up and who had not. She used that phrase exactly, who showed up. She said she was not naive about how the family would react. She had thought about that too, and she had made her peace with it. She said the only thing she wanted from me was grace, that I handle whatever came with grace, and that I not let it make me hard, and that I stay exactly who I was, because who I was had been enough for her for a very long time. I looked at my coffee cup. I looked at the wobbly table leg. My hands were around the mug. The mug was warm. I said, "You don't have to explain any of this to me." She said, "I know I don't. I want to." Outside, a bird made a sound in the bare January branches of the oak tree by the back fence. One sound, then nothing. I said, "I will." She nodded. She refilled my coffee without asking. She changed the subject to a documentary she had watched recently about monarch butterfly migration, and we talked about that for the better part of an hour. Then I helped her reorganize the lower shelf of her spice cabinet, which had gotten out of order, and I drove home. I did not turn the conversation over in my mind in terms of what it meant for outcome or distribution. That is not what it had been about. It had been about witness. She had seen me, across 31 years, clearly and without distortion, and she had said so. That was the part that mattered. The rest was paperwork. My grandmother, Elaine Ruth Calloway, passed away on the 3rd of March 2024. She died at home, in the bedroom she had slept in for 44 years, in the house on Aldermere Lane where she had ironed cloth napkins and arranged dried flowers and made real coffee for occasions she considered serious. She was 81 years old. She had made her arrangements. My Aunt Patricia called me at 6:22 a.m. She said it had been quiet. She said Grandma had been comfortable. Her voice was steady in the way voices get when someone has been awake for a long time holding something carefully and is now, finally, setting it down. I thanked her. I said I was glad she had been there. I sat on the edge of my bed afterward without turning on the light. Outside my window, the street was still dark. A car passed below. The sound of its engine rose and faded. I sat with the silence that followed it. Grief does not always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives as nothing more than a car passing at 6:22 inches the morning and the understanding, settling into the body slowly and completely, that a person who saw you clearly is no longer in the world. I sat with that for a long time, I did not rush it. At 9 a.m., I called the offices of Osei and Blackwood Estate Planning on Forsyth Avenue, not because of the estate, because my grandmother had trusted Gerald Osei for 27 years, and I wanted him to hear it from someone who had known her. His assistant, Brenda Tate, answered on the second ring. She said, "Mr. Osei had already received word and had asked to be informed." She was kind. She took my contact information carefully and read it back to confirm. Gerald Osei called me at 11:34 a.m. He said he was sorry for my loss and that he had known Elaine for a very long time and had a great deal of respect for her. He spoke briefly and specifically, which I appreciated. He said he would be initiating the probate process once the death certificate was filed, and that all parties named in the estate documents would receive formal written notification. He said I should expect a letter and a follow-up call in approximately 3 to 4 weeks. He said if I had any questions in the interim, I should not hesitate to reach out directly. I thanked him. I had a client meeting at 1 p.m. I took it. I worked through the rest of that week with the particular concentration of someone who understands that staying inside the structure of work is not avoidance, but maintenance, keeping the machinery running so that when you finally sit down with the grief properly, it does not also find you in pieces professionally. I have always understood that about myself. My grandmother understood it too. She never confused steadiness with coldness. The formal letter from Osei and Blackwood arrived at my condominium on the 19th of March 2024. It came in a cream-colored envelope, the kind that signals institutional seriousness through paperweight alone. The return address was printed cleanly. Osei and Blackwood Estate Planning, 1140 Forsyth Avenue, Suite 303, Cincinnati, Ohio, 45202. Inside, the letter was on heavy cream stock. The language was precise and formal. It requested my presence at a meeting of estate beneficiaries scheduled for Tuesday, the 2nd of April, 2024, at 10 a.m., at the offices of Osei and Blackwood. It noted that all relevant parties had been notified and that attendance, while not legally compelled, was strongly encouraged for the efficient administration of the estate. I read the letter twice standing at my kitchen counter. Then I set it under the edge of the fruit bowl so it would not move, and I went to make dinner. I did not tell anyone in my family about the letter. I had received my own and assumed they had received theirs. There was nothing to coordinate. There was no conversation to have. I had spent enough years watching my father use advance information to construct narratives, and I had learned that silence before a fact is simply the fact's best protection. The week before April 2nd, I spoke with Thomas Breyer, the senior partner who oversees the fund division at Crane and Hallowell. Thomas is 54, precise, and does not ask questions he does not need answers to. I told him I needed a half day on the 2nd. He approved it without discussion and moved a standing morning review to the following Thursday. I adjusted my schedule, completed my open client files by end of day April 1st, and set 2 automated reporting processes to run overnight. The evening before, I pressed my gray blazer. I laid out my clothes for the morning. I set my alarm for 6:30 a.m. These are small things. They mattered to me. My grandmother used to say that how you prepare for something tells you what you actually think of it. I thought this mattered, so I prepared carefully. I was at my desk by 7:15 a.m. on the morning of April 2nd. I completed 2 hours of substantive work, a client rebalancing review, and a quarterly performance memo for the advisory committee. I left the Crane and Hallowell offices at 9:20 a.m. I drove to Forsyth Avenue and parked in the covered structure across the street. I walked into the lobby of Osei and Blackwood at 9:51 a.m. Brenda Tate was at the reception desk. She recognized my name immediately and walked me to the third-floor conference room herself. She offered coffee. I accepted. The coffee came in a white ceramic mug, not a paper cup, which told me something about the kind of office this was. The conference room at Osei and Blackwood had a long oval table in pale wood, 8 padded chairs, and a credenza along the north wall with a second coffee service that remained untouched throughout the meeting. The windows faced north. The light that came through them was flat, and even the specific quality of April morning light that has not yet decided what it wants to be. It suited the room. It suited the occasion. People arrived between 9:45 and 10 a.m. By the time Gerald Osei entered the room at 10:04 a.m., 11 family members were seated. My father, Douglas Calloway, had arrived at 9:53 a.m. with my brother Garrett. They sat 3 seats to my left. My father had his hands flat on the table in front of him. He wore a dark jacket and the expression of a man who has arrived somewhere he believes he understands. My aunt Patricia sat across from me. My grandmother's son Raymond and his wife Constance had driven up from Dayton and sat together near the window. My grandmother's younger daughter Louise sat beside Raymond. Several cousins filled the remaining chairs. My father had not looked at me directly since entering the room. Neither had Garrett. I had looked at them once when I sat down and then directed my attention to the window and the pale April light and left it there. Gerald Osei set his document folder and legal pad on the table. He adjusted his glasses. He looked around the room with an expression of quiet professional gravity, not warm, not cold, simply present and prepared. He said, "Good morning." He said he understood this was a difficult occasion and that he would move through the proceedings as clearly and efficiently as possible. He explained that he would read the primary terms of the will and the associated trust documentation, that questions would be welcomed at the conclusion, and that formal distribution documents would be sent by certified mail within 10 business days. He opened the folder. He began with the standard legal preamble, the formal identification of the decedent as Elaine Ruth Calloway, the date of the will's most recent amendment, the confirmation that all documents had been properly executed under Ohio state law by a licensed notary on the 14th of September, 2023. He read the preliminary bequests first. A sum of $12,000 to Patricia Ann Bellamy, designated for the purchase of a reliable vehicle, fulfilling a promise my grandmother had made verbally 3 years prior and had then put formally into writing. A detailed list of personal property-specific pieces of jewelry, the good china service, the framed botanical prints from the upstairs hallway, the handmade quilt from the cedar chest divided among the grandchildren according to a handwritten addendum. My grandmother had prepared and signed in the presence of Gerald Osei on the 14th of September, 2023. People shifted. Someone opened a water bottle. The sound of it was very loud. The room had the particular density of a room in which a large number of people are actively managing their own expressions. Gerald Osei turned a page. He said, "The residual estate, comprising the real property located at 14 Aldermere Lane, Cincinnati, Ohio, all financial accounts held individually in the name of Elaine Ruth Calloway, and the full contents of the Calloway Family Investment Trust, valued as of the 28th of February 2024, at $4,700,000 is designated in its entirety to a single primary beneficiary." He said it without inflection. $4,700,000. He said it the way you say a fact that does not require decoration because the fact is sufficient. No one in the room moved. He said, "That beneficiary is Nadia Calloway." He said my name the way he had said everything else clearly, without additional weight, because the name carried its own weight and needed none of his. He looked at the document. He continued reading. He read the terms of the trust administration, the timeline for the property transfer initiation, the specific account numbers included in the transfer, and their current balances. His voice was even throughout. He did not look up from the document. I understood this as professional courtesy. I was grateful for it. I kept my hands folded on the table. My face was still. The gray blazer I had pressed the night before was smooth across my shoulders. I looked at a fixed point on the north wall, just above Gerald Osei's left shoulder, and I held it. To my left, my father made a sound. Not a word. The beginning of one, a breath taken for a sentence that did not come. I did not turn toward it. Garrett said, quietly, almost to himself, "What?" Not a question. Just the word, Landing. My Aunt Patricia did not speak. She placed both hands flat on the table in front of her, carefully and deliberately, as though anchoring herself. Raymond's wife, Constance, leaned toward Raymond and said something very quietly. He did not respond. Gerald Osei kept reading. He finished the trust administration terms. He read the executor designation, my name again, in that capacity as well. He read the standard closing language and set the document down with the quiet finality of a man who has done this for many years and understands that the document's work is now complete. He asked if there were questions. There were several. Raymond's wife asked about the timeline for the property transfer and whether the Aldermere Lane house would go through formal sale or private transfer. Gerald answered directly. Formal listing, with proceeds to the estate prior to distribution, estimated 60 to 90 days. Louise asked whether the personal property list would be mailed or whether they should arrange pickup. Gerald said his office would coordinate with each party individually and that nothing should be removed from the property before formal clearance. Two of my cousins asked smaller questions about the personal items on the addendum list. Gerald answered each one with the same measured precision. My father asked nothing. He sat with his hands flat on the table for the duration of the questions. At some point during Raymond's wife's second question, he turned and looked at me. I did not look back immediately. When I did briefly, once his face had the expression of a man standing in a room he does not recognize, holding a map that no longer applies. His mouth was slightly open. His eyes moved from my face to the document folder in front of Gerald Osei and then back. He closed his mouth. He looked at the table. He did not speak. He did not finish the sentence he had started when Gerald read my name. There was no sentence. There was only the beginning of breath, and then the room, and then 31 years of a particular silence arriving at its own conclusion without any help from me. Gerald Osei thanked everyone for their attendance. He said his office would be in contact with all parties within the week. He gathered his folder and legal pad and rose. I rose at the same time. I extended my hand across the table. He shook it. He said he was glad to meet me in person and that he would call early the following week to begin the trust administration process. I said that would be fine. I thanked him for his care and for his thoroughness. He nodded once, the nod of a man who takes that as a professional matter of course. I did not look at my father on the way out. There was no deliberateness to it. There was simply nothing there that required my attention. The room had said what needed saying, and it had said it without anyone's editorial assistance. I walked down the third-floor corridor, took the elevator to the lobby, pushed through the glass door, and walked across the street to the parking structure in the April light. I stopped at the grocery store on the way home. I needed eggs, coffee, and a box of the rice crackers I kept in the drawer beside my desk. I walked through the store with a small basket. I thought about whether I needed anything else. I added a lemon, I always used them, and always forgot to buy them, and a small jar of the honey I liked in tea. I paid $17.84 at the self-checkout. I drove the rest of the way home with the radio on low, a classical station playing something unhurried and undemonstrative. In my kitchen, I put the groceries away. I made coffee, real coffee, dark roast, the kind my grandmother made for serious occasions. I stood at the east-facing window while it brewed. It was 11:52 a.m. on a Tuesday in April. The light was doing what April light does when it finally decides, coming through cleanly, specific and warm, without apology. Some things take a long time to become clear, not because they are complicated, but because the people who need to see them are not looking in the right direction. My grandmother looked in the right direction for 31 years. She looked without announcement, without performance, without requiring anyone to agree with her. She simply watched. She simply knew. And when the time came, she said so in the most precise language available, the language of a legal document read aloud in a room full of people who had spent years looking elsewhere. That is a kind of love that does not make noise. It just lands, finally, on the right table, in the right name, at the right time. It does not need to explain itself. It simply is. 31 years of Sundays. 31 years of real coffee and almond cookies, and nature documentaries and spice cabinet shelves put back in order. 31 years of a woman paying attention to what other people had decided was not worth watching, and one attorney with a cream-colored folder and a steady voice who simply read what she had written. I poured my coffee. I sat at my kitchen table. I opened my laptop and pulled up the afternoon's work, a client portfolio review I had scheduled for 2 p.m., and a draft memo on fund allocation strategy that needed revision before Thursday. I read through the first page. I made a note in the margin. I drank my coffee. If you were sitting in that conference room on April 2nd, if you heard Gerald Osei say my name and watched my father's mouth open and find no sentence to finish, what would you have called what you felt? I have thought about that question. I do not think it was triumph. Triumph requires a contest, and I had stopped contesting a long time ago. I think it was something closer to completion. The particular quiet of a thing that has been unfinished for decades arriving, without drama, at its ending. I wonder if you have felt that. I wonder if you have spent years being the one who showed up quietly, consistently, without credit, and waited for the accounting to come. If you found strength in this story, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. And if you have ever been the person in your family who gave the most and was seen the least, you are not alone. Subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you in the next one.